Chief, Roman Reigns and Seth Rollins. And we're not done yet here on Saturday night's main event. The
Make your dog.
All right. It is Monday. It is 7 o'clock, and that means it is time for the Split Decision here on YouTube Live. Good evening, everybody. My name is Andrew Newman. It is Monday, July the 20th, 2026. No intro tonight. I was going to play something, and then it started rolling 90 seconds of a mandatory commercial, so I'll play that in a little while at our first break, and we'll just jump right into the show here tonight. As I mentioned, Monday, July the 20th, 2026. We're already into the 20s of July. As hard as that is to believe for some people, including myself. Soon enough we will be in August. We will be in the last month of summer, and we will start to really strongly turn our attention to football season. Actually, training camps do begin in a lot of places as early as this week. I think the Giants report to training camp. Rookies report to training camp on Thursday, I want to say, and then veterans a week from tomorrow. So it seems a little earlier, but, especially because with how late the season starts, I don't know if there was some sort of adjustment in the CBA or something like that, but it's definitely coming up. College games will start. Actually, let me check when that week 0 in college football is, because I have a feeling it's coming up pretty soon. While I'm doing that, I just figured I would. So I was, obviously there was no show last week. I was on vacation. I was down in Myrtle Beach, South Carolina for the week. We drove down last Friday into Saturday, and then last Friday night stayed in a hotel, got there Saturday. We're in Myrtle Beach until this past Saturday morning, and did the whole drive home on Saturday of this past week. Got home a little after 11 o'clock. Yesterday was the grocery and laundry and errands day. And then today I was back at work. So, the big vacation for us is over for the summer. Less vacations than we've taken in recent years. Last year we had 3 different, vacations, but we were spending a lot of our time and money and energy planning a wedding. So we had the wedding. We knew we had this week in Myrtle Beach, and then we have a few other fun things coming up. As soon as this weekend, this coming Sunday night, we are going to Jones Beach to see John Mellencamp on Sunday night. Going to go up to Lake George in August when my friend Kyle comes back to the East Coast for a couple of days. So we'll go up there for a night and see him and his family, and just a few other assorted adventures in between there. Before we get any further in, I was talking to my parents last night, and they mentioned that they are watching my nephew, their grandson, Thomas, who's getting close to being 4 years old. 4 years old in just a couple of months, in October, and they are watching him for a few days. And I guess when they're at home, when he's at home at my brother's, sometimes they'll pull my show up on the TV and he can see me, and that they were planning on doing the same thing tonight with him. So if there is a chance that they are watching right now on the TV, I just want to say hello to Thomas from Uncle Andrew, and I hope you're having a good time at Mimi and Bapa's. I know you were in the pool a lot yesterday, so if you're listening and can hear me, I just wanted to say hi, and I'll be seeing you again soon. So we got a bunch of stuff to get into tonight. It is a little bit of a slow time of year, and we'll be on. My tentative plan is to do a show this week, do a show next week, because again, I'll be off next Monday. So anything I need to do during the day, I can do. Well, I looked up the college, by the way. The first college game of the season, the week 0 games, as they call them, are on August, and Labor Day is late this year. because Labor Day is the 7th, which is the latest it can be. So the NFL doesn't start. The first full NFL Sunday is until September 13th. That's how late it is. Which means college's week 0 is Labor Day weekend, or week 1 rather. First full week is like September 4th and 5th. The 5th is the Saturday. So even the week 0 games are at the very end of August. Usually those are like the 23rd of August, and this time they're late. So the first game of the season is that Aer Lingus game over in Ireland, and that is North Carolina against TCU on Saturday, August the 29th. And then also that day you have San Jose State, USC, NC State and Virginia, Jacksonville State and North Dakota State, Sacramento State and Eastern Michigan, and then Hawaii and Stanford, also New Mexico State and Florida State, and Memphis and UNLV. So, there's usually like a half dozen games that week. Can't really see a top 25 games for the first week of the season yet because the first rankings haven't come out, but I know I have my first Army game of the season is their first game, which is Saturday, September the 5th. They play Bryant, which is an FCS school, and that will be the first chance to take in hopefully, I haven't heard any updates, good or bad, so I'm going to assume good, the hopefully fully renovated and reopened Michie Stadium this year, and I'm anxious to see that. So that'll be here sooner than you would think. I guess about 6 weeks, and we'll be fully into college football season, and then after that, the NFL, and the NFL kind of dominates the landscape. Football kind of dominates the landscape after that. Obviously, there's the baseball playoffs, and I mentioned here in New York this year, it'll be interesting, especially, and we'll obviously talk a good amount about the Yankees in a little while, but it'll be interesting, especially in New York, if the Giants and Jets get off to the starts that they've gotten off to traditionally lately. And, it's funny because the in January, when the Giants hired Harbaugh, it was obviously a big deal. Like, I remember at my bachelor party in late January, it was a big topic. And then, in March, April, May, June, the Knicks were just so all-consuming that, like, people kind of forgot about that. And now it's like, as things are ending, and as, the World Cup just ended yesterday, and, obviously there's the summer stuff of golf and tennis and things like that. And then you're just your usual day in, day out baseball. We had the All-Star game this past weekend. As people are now starting to think more about football, it's kind of like you recalibrate the Giants have a new coach, and it's supposedly a whole new era. But anyways, if the Giants and Jets get off to bad starts again, and, the Jets I have up here, the Jets open at Tennessee, and then they're home against Green Bay. They're at Detroit. They're at Chicago, home against Cleveland, at New England. A decently tough stretch. So if we get into early October and the Jets are 1-4 or 1-5, even 2-5, and then the Giants open up with, let's see what the Giants have. I know the first couple of games, but the Giants are home against Dallas on Sunday night. Then they're at the Rams, who are the favorites to win the Super Bowl, on Monday night. Then a few softer games, Tennessee, Arizona, Washington, New Orleans. But, let's just say hypothetically they get off to a bad start. They start out 0-2 and they're 1-4 or whatever. If you get to mid-October and the Giants and Jets are both crappy, and, the Mets will be done by then, and the Yankees, let's say, get bounced in the divisional round or the wild card round, it will be interesting to see how much the start of the NBA season recaptures the city. And I don't just mean like opening night. I mean, if there's nothing else going on in basketball, or, if baseball is over for both local teams and the football teams get off to a terrible start, will people be like, okay, the third, fourth, fifth games of the year with the Knicks, will that be the topic of conversation for everybody on the radio and just talking to people and stuff? But, that's still several months in the future before we get into all that. but I just, since I started on this vein, I guess I'll just keep going for just a little while. And by the way, these are the times of year I do not mind calls. I never mind calls, but calls definitely help out with filling some of the time. And the number is 845-416-8704 is the number to call in, or you can hit us up on the instant feedback over there on the right-hand side, the live chat. You can see my comment that just says, let's get started. So, just kind of on the football as we, just because I mentioned it as we started, and just because it is always looming sort of, it is always sort of looming just off in the distance. As I sort of retake stock of the Giants specifically in the NFL season, I think my level of excitement for the Giants is still right around where it was in January, which was, I am very positive about the move that they made to get John Harbaugh. I think it was the best possible move that a team in the Giants situation could have hoped for, not just this year, but in any of the recent years, which is, another horrible year. You fire your coach, and somehow a guy who's, on a perennial Super Bowl contender, as the head coach of a perennial Super Bowl contender, has gotten, as recently as 2 years ago, the Ravens were in the AFC Championship game. And it was probably time to go for him in Baltimore. They probably, if you're going to make another jab at it with Lamar Jackson, you want to do it now instead of waiting till he's, really on the back nine of his career. So I get that from a Ravens standpoint. But from a Giants standpoint, it was a no-brainer. Doesn't mean they still didn't almost blow it. And I think, again, for the Giants, I kind of look at it as I'm excited for the long-term future. You still have to sort of accept the reality of what this team is going to look like, especially after they traded after they traded probably their best player the last bunch of years, definitely their best player the last bunch of years in Dexter Lawrence. Now, I was thrilled with the haul they got for him, sort of like I just mentioned with Harbaugh. It was definitely time for Lawrence to move on and for the Giants to get something for him, but he does leave a big hole in their defense. So there's going to be a lot of unanswered questions, and certainly, that Dallas game in week 1 is a lot of, is an opportunity for a real big moment for the John Harbaugh Giants. And that doesn't mean if the Giants win that game, I think they're going to win the division or anything like that. But if they could get that game at home on national TV against whether you kind of realize it or not, the Giants record, as bad as the Giants have been against the Eagles the last 10 years or so, they've been worse against the Cowboys. Until they beat the Cowboys in week 18 last year, when we wanted them to lose and lock up the number 1 pick or the number 2 pick at that point. As bad as they had been, against the Eagles, they've beaten the Eagles a couple of times recently, including last year in October on Thursday Night Football, when it was, it was still very much games that mattered, and the Giants really put a hurting on the Eagles in that game in darts. I want to say second or third start. If they can beat the Cowboys on Sunday Night Football in week 1, it really kind of sets the tone. Looks like we're getting a call here, so let's go right to a call. Hello.
Hey, it's Dan.
How you doing?
Good. How are you?
I'm pretty good.
I think I know what your opinion's going to be, but I'm curious what your thoughts are on this whole Cam Scatterboo thing.
Yeah, so my understanding is he was at some kind of event, or at that, there's this big Mark Fest in New York City this weekend for autographs and memorabilia and everything like that. And I guess he did a backflip and fell.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, so here's the thing with him, and I've said this all along. People need to it's not going to last with him. It's just, and it's got, the backflip is emblematic of it, but like he doesn't play. He's a small running back who plays in a way that gets a lot of people excited, but like is going to take like he's not a feature running back to begin with, like a feature number one running back, even with what that means in 2026.
He's not Derrick Henry.
No, he also is coming off a major injury, and doesn't really, run a style that's going to be conducive to a long NFL career anyway. So all of the backflip thing is, it's not good optics. It's not good, I trust that he didn't re-injure himself, but I also doesn't make me, it doesn't make me think any better of his long-term prospects for being a successful and durable NFL player.
Yeah, I feel like you can. I don't know. It feels like he's not serious.
Yeah, and that's and I mean again,
he doesn't act seriously. He gives you reasons to believe he's not serious, even if he is.
And it's like I get to an extent he's super young, he's 23 or whatever, and he's but like, yeah, I don't envision big things for him with the Giants or within the NFL. And maybe I'm wrong about that. And he flashed a little last year, but like I would much more be happy with him as a change of pace back than I would him as a primary running back. And I would hope that Tyrone Tracy or whoever is good enough where they naturally get more carries than him this year. But no, the flipping thing is not good because you just it's a surgically repaired leg. He's not going to. I guess this is where I would say it's going to bother me. He's not going to practice in training camp. Like the Giants aren't going to have him practice in training camp unless Harbaugh is a totally different animal than any NFL head coach I've seen in the last 10 years or so.
Mm-hmm.
Like he's going to not be in a contact situation. He's probably not going to play in the preseason, like because guys who are coming off season-ending injuries the previous year are usually really, really nursed back to health, and it's like the team is willing to take all of those precautions with you for better or worse, and you're not going to, you know what I mean?
Yeah, that's that. I think that's it's like, well, and again, I know this is an oversimplification, but it's like you can't practice, but you can do this.
And so, I'm not somebody who's like, well, they're losing, they shouldn't be like. I don't agree with the sort of like when people see guys out at a bar, on Monday night, which is the night before the players get off. Usually during the season on Tuesdays, the players get, that's the players' day off. People are like, oh, they're losing, but they got time to go out to bars, or, oh, like he's a rookie and he's got time to do these fan fests and he should be worrying about football. Like, that's not what I'm saying. Guys have lives.
None of these guys are good. Yeah, and nobody's going to live their job, their sport, whatever, every waking moment of the day.
And it's July and they're getting ready to go into training camp. It's not that. I don't care about that. Like, and truthfully, I would have less of a problem if he was there like shotgunning beers. You know what I mean? I'd be like, well, he's trying to be Rob Gronkowski. And the thing about Rob Gronkowski is he was kind of a freak of nature and was still one of the best players in the NFL, doing that and all that. But like, okay, he's trying to be like the new King Meathead and okay, whatever. Like, I would almost understand, or I would understand that more than like, oh, he tried to do a backflip to show that he's like, just because that's like his thing. And if he hadn't been coming off a lower leg injury, I guess even then I probably wouldn't care. I'd say, yeah, he probably shouldn't do that, but whatever. But he's coming off a serious lower leg injury, and he's doing unnecessary stuff like that.
Yeah, that's the whole point. It's that it seems like he's not, even if he is, it seems like he's not prioritizing getting better from the injury.
Well, and that's the thing too, is perception can become reality. If he, let's say they do baby him and he doesn't play in the I don't even mean baby him, but like they, really take precautions and he doesn't play in the preseason. And then in week 1, he has 3 carries and fumbles the ball. And then in week 2, he re-aggravates something. It's like you've given people ammunition to go, well, he obviously didn't take his off-season conditioning, seriously or whatever. And even if it's not true, then it's a thing. Like, I do some, and again, I don't want to negate what I was just saying last year, or just saying a few minutes ago, but like him and the quarterback too. It's like, you guys do realize you played 1 year last year and the team sucked. Like, you know what I mean? Like, the Tommy DeVito thing, I almost respected more because Tommy DeVito knew it wasn't going to last long. Like, these guys, it's sort of like, why don't you let's ease off on the narrative that the two of them took the NFL by storm last year. You know what I mean?
Yeah, again, you said it about the Jackson Dart thing with the politics. If you agree with the politics, you're going to be fine with it. If you disagree with it, you're going to hate it, especially in this day and age with Trump and everything. So I try to take a step back from my own personal opinions and be like, whatever, it's his beliefs. But you're right. It's the attitude of like, is there other stuff that Dart has done beyond the Trump thing that's been I know he's just been out there, but
no, I not that I can think of. I just more mean like the sort of whole thing of like, well, obviously the Giants have their franchise quarterback now, and it's like, no, they don't obviously have that. Like, we liked some
people said the same thing about Daniel Jones.
Yeah. And there was even less to go off of on that. And to say nothing of the fact that Jackson Dart had to go into concussion protocol like 6 times last year. Now, most of those times he was okay, but like, I'm not saying these guys aren't I'm sure they are taking, their business seriously. And I'm glad there is John Harbaugh is not going to put up with any shit from guys who've had a couple of good years, or for a couple of good games rather. Like, I am sure that they're not like neglecting their organizational responsibilities. I just feel like it's hard enough to, like, let me use an example. Like, next year, the Knicks are going to take every team's best shot, and there's going to be tons of people going out there to prove that, Jalen Brunson is not the king of the world, and he's not the best player in the NBA, and they want to take a shot at the champions. But like, at least that attitude is the product of them winning a championship.
Yeah,
I don't need a lot of guys pinning their ears back and like really trying to like level Jackson Dart or like, make these. I don't want them painting targets on their back on top of the fact that they are, on top of what was already there. I don't know. Some of it I seem like an old man, and I'm not trying to say that. I just like, how about get to 4-4 before, but yeah, the backflip thing is not a good, that's not a good idea. Like,
well, it's like Shockey all those years ago. Yeah, the media, the New York sports media is who they are, and they're going to blow up small things into big things, especially when it's visual, when it's things that you can see. Not everybody's going to understand what defense they should have run on 3rd and 4, but everybody's going to understand an injured player doing a backflip. So to a certain degree, yeah, he's only 25 or whatever, but he's also 25 making millions and millions of dollars. Maybe there needs to be a level of understanding and discretion with that of like, is doing this going to create a distraction to my team?
Yeah. And truthfully, I think even if he did it successfully, people would have been like, it's probably, especially to me with the position he plays, I don't have a lot of optimism that that's going to be a long-term proposition for him being a factor for the Giants running game or running whatever it is in this day and age, but like production from the running back position, I guess I should say.
Yeah, you figure the 3 most important guys to the most important guy to the Giants' future is probably Dart. Second is Harbaugh, and then I don't know who third would be, but Scadaboo is much less important than what the quarterback and the coach look like.
And it's interesting that, and I wasn't really planning on starting with football, but I got into it, and why not? The Abdul Carter situation is interesting because he didn't have huge numbers last year in terms of sacks and things like that. every like NFL analyst who like watches and analyzes, I guess, they're all like, he was so close to being an all-pro last year. Like, basically he's like the half step that guys take from rookie year to second year. Like, so many people are predicting him to have a huge year. Now, that's not a guarantee it's going to happen or that it's even, likely to happen. But like, it kind of goes to what you said, where like, if you just looked at, people who just look at the stat sheet would be like, well, he had a bad year. And it's like, but all the people who watch these things with a scout's eye are like, this guy is really close to being a dominant player. So, whether that happens or not, who knows? But I think if the Giants were going to actually have a playoff season this year, let's say, I think a lot of it would come from him taking a big leap in year 2.
I agree. All right. Well, I just wanted to call and check in on that.
I appreciate the call. Talk to you later.
Yep. Talk to you later.
Bye now. All right. That was my brother. Thank you for the call. We will, it's 7:30. So let's take that first break. I will play what I was planning on playing as we went to, let me see if I can get it up again, or is it going to prompt me for another commercial? I will play this and let's say, hey, Andrew, been out for the last couple of weeks. Congrats on the wedding. Before we go, we got Dana. Hey, Andrew, been out for the last couple of weeks. Congrats on the wedding. Some advice from someone that has been married for more than 20 years. Everything is your fault. Congrats, man. Well, thank you very much, Dana. I really appreciate that. I'm glad to hear you again. I was a bit concerned. I'm like, hopefully we didn't lose Dana with the switch from Facebook to YouTube. So I'm glad to see Dana back. Like I said, I'm gonna take a quick break. We'll come back. We'll get into, I don't know, maybe some baseball. Maybe we'll get into whatever. Again, if anybody wants to call in, feel free. 845-416-8704. We will be back in just a few minutes on the Split Decision on Facebook or on YouTube Live.
Sale now at WWETakeover.com. Madison Square Garden in New York, Saturday night's main event, presented by Arby's. We have the meats. We have a lot of celebrities here tonight as well, including Pittsburgh Steelers legend Buzzsaw Nelson of the
man's excellence.
New York.
This city produces pressure. It demands excellence. It rewards greatness and those who deliver. Those who lift their names into Gotham's mythology join that rarest fraternity, the Kings of New York. Its name is cool, guaranteed. And Piazza's uplifting swing.
This one has a chance. Home run!
For Big Blue, it's LT around the edge and Parcells on his players' shoulders. And well, there's this too.
Eli Manning stays on his feet, caught by Tyree.
Up in the Bronx, it's the charisma babe. It's Garrett, DiMaggio, and Mantle. It's Reggie in October. And Mr. November.
On the track, at the wall. See ya!
It's Joe Louis dominance over Max Schmeling. At Madison Square Garden, the city's sporting cathedral, where do we begin?
Returns of the Stanley Cup champions!
It's Messier's manic laughter after more than 50 years. It's Reed out of the locker room. It's Ali Frazier, Lewis, and Marciano. It's the superstars, Bruno, Hogan. And this year, we welcome the newest Royal.
Big fans, this is not a dream!
After 5 decades of no titles, Jalen Brunson restored New York's belief in the Knicks. And in winning a championship, he gained another title. The newest King of New York.
2 from the New York Knicks, NBA champion, NBA Finals MVP, and the King of New York, number 11, Jalen Brunson. Brunson to tie the game, and it does. Brunson on the drive, spins underneath, puts it up, puts it in. Jalen Brunson does it again. Brunson, bullseye. Brunson gets it, fires on the play. Got no up the top. The 2026 NBA Finals MVP is the captain, Jalen Brunson. He will be the King of New York for the rest of his life, and rightfully so.
All right, back here live on The Split Decision here on YouTube Live. It is Monday, July the 20th. That was Saturday night's main event on the, I guess it was on Peacock, but produced by NBC on the WWE WWE Saturday night's main event. Was at Madison Square Garden this past weekend, and they had some Knicks guests there. Karl Anthony Towns came out and interfered in a match, and he did something that, you know, big guys historically in wrestling, like, you know, guys. It's funny because guys who get advertised as 7 feet tall in wrestling are usually like 6'8". Karl Anthony Towns is legitimately 7 feet tall, but big guys always like step over the top rope. You know, they get on the apron and they step into the ring over the top rope. Karl Anthony Towns did something that I've never seen before, and I think most wrestling fans like that I saw on Reddit talking about I've never seen before. He stepped from the floor to the apron. Like, he didn't take the steps. You know, guys will take the steps, obviously. Some guys will jump like from the floor to the apron. It's not something that wrestlers can't do. He didn't jump. He just took a step, like from the ground. He just put his right leg up on the apron and just stood up. And I've never seen that before, but he is 7 feet tall. And then Jalen Brunson came out at the end with Roman Reigns, and he had surgery on his hand, on his shooting hand, so you knew he wasn't going to do anything physical one way or another, but he kind of stood in the way so that Roman Reigns could recover. But the video I played was really cool because it was Eli Manning's voice, in case anybody didn't know, and it was, you know, narrating like a New York sports heroes intro. And since it was the WWE, they included some wrestling, so they included Bruno Sammartino and Hulk Hogan, who were, you know, probably the two biggest stars in terms of like Madison Square Garden that you're ever going to get. I could go into a really long wrestling lesson, and it is July, so maybe I'd have some time for it. But, you know, basically in the days before pay-per-views and even weekly shows, Madison Square Garden once a month was the big show in the WWE, the equivalent of a pay-per-view, I guess. And, you know, how well you were doing in Madison Square Garden was considered how well you were doing as champion, basically. And that's why Bruno Sammartino was the champion for 11 years, was just kept continuously selling out Madison Square Garden once a month. And Hogan, when Hogan won the title, it was at Madison Square Garden. And then even all through the 80s and into the early 90s, they were still running a monthly Monday night show at Madison Square Garden, even in the eras of pay-per-views and Saturday night's main events and everything else, they still ran that monthly Garden show. And by then there were so many, they were running all over the country. So only Hogan wasn't at all of them, but he was at a lot of them. And especially early on in his first run, from 84 to 88, he was at most of them. So they are the two biggest sort of wrestling stars in Garden history. And we could go back to Antonino Rocca in the 50s and stuff like that. And I'll spare everybody the full lesson on that. But it was cool that they included them. And I don't think gratuitously so. I think in terms of what they were talking about, it worked. So, I just figured I would play that because it was very cool. And they also, it was the Knicks PA announcer who introduced him. I'm sure it was a recording, but who introduced him. And then he was sitting at his locker in the Knicks locker room, like it was empty. And he was sitting there. And then he got up and walked like through the tunnel and, past all the people in the arena, or past all the people in the back and everything. And, and came out. Now that was really cool. So anyway, and that was really, I don't know that they said it's the first time he's been at Madison Square Garden since the Knicks won the title, because obviously Game 5 was in San Antonio. Game 4 was in New York, the huge comeback, the OG Anunoby tip game. I can't say for a fact Jalen Brunson hasn't been back since then. He hasn't been back when the arena's been open to the public. Like, he may have been there to do something in his locker or something like that, or, something, have a meeting with somebody or something, but he wasn't in front of a crowd of people at Madison Square Garden until that Saturday night's main event on Saturday. And again, not that I put a lot of stock in the ESPYs, but the ESPYs were this past week, and the Knicks won a ton of awards. The Knicks won Team of the Year. Anunoby, I think, won Play of the Year. Brunson won Male Athlete. So like they really are still sort of the big, headline story in North American team sports right now is the New York Knicks. So like in the sense of the calendar year 2026. I feel like I would be remiss if I didn't mention that the World Cup wrapped up yesterday. Spain won a 1-0 game over Argentina in the championship game, the cup final at MetLife Stadium yesterday. It does sort of underscore, not to pivot this away from immediately, but if you're coming here for hard-hitting soccer analysis, you're probably not going to be well served. But the thing I'll say with the field, it does underscore just how thin the story behind the Giants and Jets, insisting the MetLife Stadium has to be field turf. Just how sort of thin a cover story that is, because they were able to just import grass for the World Cup and, put a new playing surface down on top of the turf for the World Cup. And, I don't think it broke the bank. I don't think it put whoever did that in, permanent insolvency, or, the overtime. The overages alone in labor didn't put any companies out of business. Like, no, they just laid down a grass field and played, half a dozen soccer games on them over the course of 5 weeks and wheeled that grass field back out. So, as I always say with that, the Giants and Jets chose to save costs by sharing a stadium, which would be a little bit lame even if the stadium was good. It would be a little bit lame even if it was a nice stadium. The fact that it's not, and it's a purely sort of drab cat food can looking gray edifice, makes it even worse, but it wouldn't be great either way. And I've heard people say, like, well, what do you want from a football stadium? It's, and to an extent I agree with that. by the way, it's July, folks. We're going to meander all over the place. To an extent, I agree with that. Like, yeah, a football stadium, I mean, look, there are people who want you to know how much of a real fan they are. And usually they're people who haven't been to a game in 20 years. And, these are the people who say, like, even about a baseball stadium, like, oh, who cares about the stadium? I'm there to watch the game. What do we need all this other stuff for? And it's like, yeah, okay. Like, again, do I think there needs to be a Ferris wheel in the outfield? No. And the pool in Arizona is more like, whatever. I guess that doesn't hurt you. But my point is, baseball, for the most part, needs a lot more ambiance. You go to a baseball game, it's 1 of 81. I'm not talking about playoffs or World Series or whatever, but it's like, it's the summer. Generally, you want it to be a nice place to spend a couple hours, where you can walk around. And having now been to about 20 of the 30 baseball stadiums, I think the fact that the open concourses, like, that's the one big upgrade. Whatever your thoughts are about anything else, the biggest upgrade from all of these stadiums in terms of actually watching a game there as a fan is the open concourses. You go to get something to eat or drink, or you go to the bathroom, or just you get there and you're moving between sections or getting to your seat. You're not in what feels like the high school, the hallway in my high school between periods where you're jammed in like sardines. There's open concourses, and you can, even if you can't actually see the game, you can see outside and you can see a piece of the field, and you feel like you're, that's the biggest upgrade. I feel like that would be the thing if you transported somebody back to an old stadium. And I got this a little at Oakland Coliseum when I was there in I almost said in the 70s, but when I was there a couple of years ago, the last year the A's were there, I feel like if you just like dropped me back into the old Yankee Stadium right now, I would be like, and when I say the old Yankee Stadium, I mean the previous one, the post 1976 one. I feel like that would be the thing that would be the starkest reminder to me. I'd be like, oh yeah, it was like cavernous. You're in like a hallway and you can't, like, all you see is a concrete wall. You don't see out onto the field or anything like that. So baseball stadiums, I feel like, yeah, you do need a little more, or you want a little more ambiance. No matter how hardcore a fan you are, you want to be able to enjoy sort of the atmosphere of the ballpark. Football stadiums, yes, can get away with being relatively charmless. Football stadiums can be these big, imposing edifices. Obviously you have your Lambeau Fields that are their own unique thing. But in general, they can kind of get away with being sort of like big concrete bowls. But I have now been to Lambeau Field, but we'll put that aside. That's its own thing. I've been to M&T Bank Stadium in Baltimore for a Ravens-Giants game like 15 years ago. In December, Giants were terrible, or Giants played terrible that day. I've been to a Patriot game in Foxborough when the Patriots were horrible. I think the final score of that game was 6-3. It was December of 2 years ago. It was Belichick's last year. I've been to MetLife a bunch of times. I've been to Lincoln Financial Field, not for an Eagles game, but for Army Navy. I've been around I've been to the Georgia Dome, the old Falcon Stadium for WrestleMania, not for a football game, but like I've been to some NFL stadiums now, not as many as baseball, obviously, and almost none except for Lambeau outside of the northeastern part of the country. So but M&T Bank Stadium, for example, from what I remember about it, there was nothing gorgeous about that stadium, but you know what? You go in, everything is purple and black. It's very, what that's there for. It is the home of the Ravens. You go to Lincoln Financial Field and there's just Eagle stuff everywhere. And again, that stadium is kind of neat with the one open-ish end zone. It's not fully open, but same thing with Foxborough. The one end zone is sort of like, it's not a full seating bowl. It kind of breaks up behind one of the end zones. that's kind of what passes for personality in NFL stadiums for the most part. And it's enough. That's enough. But the MetLife doesn't even have that. And yeah, I get that some of it is how bad the two teams have been since they've moved there. I mean, the Giants did win the Super Bowl the second year the stadium was open, but since then, just horrible football from both of them since that stadium opened. Certainly since 2012. But just the state, like the stadium would be, even if it was a little nicer, is what I'm trying to say. The fact that they share a stadium and they try to cheap out, and you can talk to me about, construction costs in New York versus whatever, fine. The larger point remains, which is the Giants and Jets shared a stadium to the detriment of their fan bases, and probably to both teams, if we're being fair, but certainly to the detriment of their fan bases. They went in on a new stadium together. For the Giants, it was even worse because even though they shared for Giants fans, it was even worse because even though they shared the previous stadium, it was Giants Stadium. The Giants owned the stadium. It was very clearly Giant Stadium. If you went to a Jet game, you could see all the Jet stuff bungee corded up on the walls over the Giant stuff because they weren't allowed to take the Giant stuff down. So the Jets actually gained something by being equal partners with the Giants in this new stadium. The Giants lost something by being equal partners with the Jets in MetLife Stadium. But getting back to the original point, it is not the fact that they don't think they can support a grass field because both teams play there is their problem. Like, I would insist, like we saw with the World Cup, they could put a grass field down and halfway through the season replace it. If they had to do that every year, that would still, or like I said, I think they could find a way to switch each of them out and have a Giants field and a Jets field and just wheel them in like the Cardinals do in Arizona. And, I know the stadium wasn't built with that in mind, but like I said, I would say figure that out. That's your problem. But just this idea that it's some insurmountable thing for them to put a grass field in MetLife Stadium when they do it every time they have to for not just the World Cup, although this is the most glaring example, but they have to do it for whenever they play international soccer there. Because there's no soccer on turf, like not at that level. It's on natural grass. And again, I'm not saying that same field because soccer fields need to be constructed differently than grass football fields. All you need to do is watch some of those early NFL London games where they were playing on just the normal soccer pitch, and it was horrible. The field turned to absolute mud because the average soccer player is, weighs whatever they weigh, and are not in full pads and are kind of running free up and down the field, whereas football is 350-pound linemen in the trenches slamming into each other. You do need a different kind of grass. But that doesn't mean you can't have grass. So again, it just frustrates me every time that subject comes up and people are like, well, they share a stadium. What do you want them to do? And it's like, well, not share a stadium, but that ship has sailed at least for another 15 years. And I will stipulate to that. But how about in the meantime, you clean up your own mess and find a way to get a grass field in there, even if it requires two separate surfaces that get rotated in and out, or even if it requires changing the field November 1st every year and just dealing with that. And that's your problem. That's another option, I feel like, but whatever. Also, there are plenty of fields like the Steelers one, and I'm not saying that's the nicest grass field in football, but like that's where the University of Pittsburgh plays all their home games too. So like there are times where that stadium goes weeks and weeks and weeks and weeks where there's a game every single week, and they somehow manage to pull it off. Now maybe by the end of the year it's a little rough, but like they managed to pull it off. It's not like all of those grass stadiums don't do anything but the NFL team. Most of them at least have a couple of college games a season. So that's just sort of my aside. Let me see if there's any other NFL stuff I wanted to mention before we move on. Because like I said, I went a little longer on the NFL than I was was thinking about going, and I see this article here: NFL players renew push for grass on heels of World Cup. I want to see if it lists how many people. Head of Sunday's FIFA World Cup at MetLife Stadium, dozens of NFL players, blah, 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 took to social media. MetLife is among the stadiums that replaced its artificial turf with grass for the 78 World Cup games. If stadiums can make grass work for the World Cup, they can make it work for NFL players. Cost of doing nothing is bad for players' bodies, et cetera, et cetera. So, this is one where I happen to agree with the players. Now, I think the players tend to bring this up, and then when it comes time to collectively bargain, they give up on this in terms of a negotiating chip to get leverage for more financial considerations. And I get that. But if NFL players want this to actually happen, they're going to have to make it a sticking point in negotiations rather than just a thing they bring up and then cast aside when it comes time to raise the salary cap or create different financial incentives and more guaranteed money and stuff like that. So, I don't really have much else with football or the NFL to talk about. With the World Cup on the whole, people, I'm not qualified to talk about the caliber of soccer or whatever. I know a lot of people said that the move from 32 teams to 48 was definitely a benefit. And I saw a good article. I think it was I forget who it was by, but basically comparing it to the college football playoff expansion and saying the difference is when the World Cup went from 32 to 48, it increased. So I didn't really know how this worked, but I guess basically the World Cup guarantees spots to different confederations. So like CONCACAF, which is like Northeastern soccer, or not Northeastern, North American soccer, is guaranteed a certain number of spots in the World Cup. The South American Federation, the Asian Federation, the Middle Eastern, the European, and obviously European soccer is a much higher level, so they get more teams. And when they increase it from 32 to 48, everybody got more teams, like representative-wise. What college football is trying to do would be the equivalent of when the World Cup added more teams, if they had said, okay, we're going to add 16 more teams, but 13 of them are guaranteed to come from Europe. That's basically what college football is trying to do, is say, yes, we want to keep increasing the playoffs, but what we want to do is basically add every team who finishes over 500 in the SEC and the Big Ten, and then, keep everybody else at the same level. And hey, more teams are making the playoffs. Why aren't you in favor of more teams making the playoffs? And it's what's going to ultimately end up happening. My Dana said, how popular was the World Cup? My wife watched the final. She watches only the Saints, the Super Bowl, and the Lakers. That's it. I don't doubt how popular the World Cup is, and it seems like it was a big success for the U.S. For like, in terms of hosting it, I think the World Cup is kind of a raw deal financially for the countries that do host it. I think sort of the impact on U.S. soccer culture and the level of U.S. soccer play, there's no doubt that 1994 saw a dramatic rise in popularity and probably ultimately in level of play for the U.S. soccer team, although it took a while to get there. You know what I mean? And it was funny. I was in Myrtle Beach last week, I said, and one afternoon we ended up going to a brewery just to check it out. And it was during I think it was the first half of the England-Argentina semifinal game. And it's like, I don't know how big, like, I'm like, we're in South Carolina. Like, I don't know. And I mean, we were at Myrtle Beach. It's not like we were deep in the woods or whatever, but I'm like, I don't know how much soccer's got like a foothold here or whatever, but there was tons of people there and tons of people into it and stuff like that. I guess the larger question is just sort of like, there is no doubt that soccer is a much more popular sport in the U.S. than it was 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 30 years ago, certainly. I just wonder how much, like, did the World Cup specifically being in the U.S., and I know there was games in Mexico and Canada, but just to simplify this for a minute, did the World Cup and it happening and specifically being in the US create many more fans than it would have just otherwise in the US. I'm talking about specifically in the US. And I don't know if it will, because there is a rabid soccer fan base. There are people who love soccer in this country, certainly. It seems like most of them, their biggest passions lie with the British League, the English Premier League. Some people like the MLS, but I think there are, and this is the one thing, if I was going to the extent that I'm able to comment on any sort of soccer thing, I would say, like, I feel like I wonder how many people who are like big into EPL, like the English Premier League, and get up and go to the bars in New York City at 7 a.m. On weekends to watch the Premier League. I wonder how many of them follow the MLS to any level. I'm not saying it's zero, but it's also not 100% either. And I understand MLS is not a top 3 or 4 league in the world. Like, I'm not ignorant to that fact, but like, I just wonder if it's kind of like going to plateau at some point, at least in terms of men's soccer, when the biggest fan base in the country are fans of a league in Europe. And you could say, well, that's the same with anybody who likes any American sport in another country. And I say, yeah, and that's probably why there's going to be a natural plateau. But, anyway, this is more just musing out loud. So let's do this. Let's take a break. We'll come back. We'll get to we got to talk some baseball. We got to talk about the Yankees. We'll see what else there is to talk about, and we'll see how late the conversation calls for us to go into the 8:00 hour. But let's take our second break rather. Let's play some more grocery store music. Let's do that. It's been a little while, some Muzak, if you will. And we will be right back on the Split Decision on YouTube Live in just a few minutes.
Avatar: Fire and Ash is now streaming on Disney+.
Go now. See this world. See yourself.
Avatar: Fire and Ash. Get more when you bundle with Hulu.
You ready?
Play your game, baby.
Let's go!
This is the way things are now, and you need to just...
All right, back here live on the Split Decision here on YouTube Live. It's a little after 8 o'clock here on this Monday, July the 20th, 2026. We'll be back again next week, and then, we'll see. We'll see about the week after. Probably take a few more weeks off as we get into early to mid-August before we really start settling into being on pretty much every week as we get into football season. But I do kind of enjoy, sometimes it's hard when I come on. I'm like, geez, I got to find 2 hours worth of not just stuff to talk about, but stuff to have something to say about during this time of year. But, sometimes I think when I let myself sort of wander like I just did, it's at least different than just sort of reciting box scores or whatever. While we're on the subject of whatever, Hello Old Sports, the podcast I do with my brother. We've had a lot of good episodes, or a lot of different episodes out recently for your listening pleasure. We have done, we did an episode recently, came out on, it was an interview with an author named Randall Simon about the first All-Star game, the first baseball All-Star game in 1933. And he does what's his name? Let me see if I can get his actual name. I probably screwed that up. He does a kind of ties in the world as it was in 1933, specifically around the Great Depression, but, tying in FDR, the assassination attempt on FDR's life in early 1933, and tying everything into the, to the World's Fair and all of that. So we, Randall Sullivan was the name. Sorry. I think Randall Simon was the guy who on the Pirates who hit the sausage in the head with a bat during the sausage race 25 years ago. So we did an episode on that. We did another episode in our last games series where we do cover the last games of legends. Like the first one was Ruth and Gretzky and Tom Brady. And this one was Ty Cobb, Bobby Orr, Lawrence Taylor, which comes in handy because I had just spent so much time on our recent episode about the Ray Hanley era Giants in 91, 92. And this was about the 93 Giants, the last fight for Joe Louis, which is Joe Louis's entire life story is not exactly an uplifting tale, but certainly him at the end of his boxing career when he's clearly doesn't want to be doing it, but needs to pay off the IRS, which is continually basically soaking him in interest for the rest of his life. And who else? Ty Cobb, did I mention Ty Cobb? We did. He was involved, and Larry Bird. So We did that one. We got a good episode coming up this week on or coming up in terms of we're recording it this week. So it'll be out in a few weeks on the final season of the ABA in 1975, 1976, where the league went from 10 teams at the very start of the season down to one folded right before the season started, two folded fairly quickly into the season. They played the rest of the year with 7. And then right as the season ended, the Virginia Squires folded. So they were left with 6 teams, and the NBA absorbed 4 of those teams, and the other 2 teams were left with different settlements, one of which turned out to be very lucrative for the owners of the Spirits of St. Louis. But you'll have to listen to the Yellow Old Sports podcast to get the full download on all of that. NBA, we're in kind of a holding pattern. You know, most of the big moves have been made. I think the big move for the Knicks since the last time we were on the air was just that the Knicks did re-sign Jordan Clarkson, which means they are going to be bringing back 9 of their top 10 guys from last year. The Knicks did try to sign a reserve big man from Dallas. They signed him to an offer sheet. He is a restricted free agent. The Mavericks matched it, so the Knicks are still right now going. The plan as of the depth chart at the moment is Karl Anthony Towns backed up by Andre Drummond. You would imagine they'd like to get a little more depth on that, but you know the big moves are pretty much over. The one big move that's still out there is what LeBron James ends up doing. You know, LeBron is still sort of biding his time. I guess theoretically all 29 teams would be in the hunt because he said he's not 29 of the 30 teams because all we know at the moment is he's not going back to the Lakers. This is from earlier today. ESPN's Shams Charania went on NBA Today to discuss the future of LeBron James and the next step of his career. I spoke to Rich Paul, his longtime agent, this morning, and Rich made it clear to me that it's LeBron James's decision right now. All of the information is in. The teams are set. Everyone has made their moves. There is no decision or choice yet. No timetable on the choice of a team. My understanding over the past couple of weeks is the focus has been primarily on the Eastern Conference teams, being Cleveland, Miami, and Philadelphia. So kind of what we expected. You do wonder what happened with the Warriors thing because that sounded like it was all but a done deal, and now it's not. So, or, you know, now it doesn't even seem like it's going to happen, let alone be a done deal. So it will be interesting. It will be interesting to see what, if anything ever comes out on why that didn't end up happening. It could be as simple as it was the odds of it happening were blown up, but it seemed like it was a done deal pretty much right after he announced he wasn't going back to the Lakers. To obviously, you know, has lost a ton of steam since then. I would rank them. It seems like Cleveland and Philly are, well, I guess all 3 of them are equally likely at this point. You know, I don't know where he'd do the most good. I think he certainly can make a difference for a team, but you're also banking on a lot of things, including him being healthy the whole year. And I don't mean 82 games the whole year. I mean, is able to play come playoff time. You almost wonder, like, if you bring him in and you're one of those teams who fancies themselves a contender next year, do you almost tell him, like, we're not even going to play you at all until January? I'm sure he wouldn't go for that, but, like, I don't know. So that's really the biggest story that's left out there for the NBA is where LeBron goes. And, you know, obviously the schedule will come out sometime in August. No news on that as of yet. We did have the hockey and basketball schedules come out this past week. The NHL is going up to 84 games. So after decades of the NBA and NHL both being 82 games, the NHL is going up to 84 games. The first game will actually be at the end of September. It's like September 30th. So the NHL season starts just over 2 months from now. They are doing this again, and I, for the life of me, don't understand it. They did this last year too. The NHL season, hang on, the NHL season is starting on Wednesday, September 29th at 5:00 in the afternoon. I do not understand why they did this last year, and everybody figured, okay, there's some sort of weird fluke thing with this, that they're doing it. The Hurricanes open the season September 29th at 5 p.m. Eastern time, raising their Stanley Cup championship and taking on the Panthers in Carolina. So I need to know, why is NHL season starting at 5 p.m.? Because they did this last year. Oh, okay. So it's designated to accommodate a triple header broadcast schedule on ESPN. I still think it's absurd. I start the season the day before then if you really need to. I mean, that seems absurd to me, to start the season at 5:00 Eastern time. To somehow doing a game at 5:00 on a Wednesday afternoon is accommodating television. I don't understand how that's accommodating television. So it says NHL has had an 82-game season since 95-96. After some franchises complained about an imbalanced number of divisional games, the league sought to ease those concerns. Under the league's new CBA, schedule has increased to 84 games. NHL previously had an 82-game season from 92-94. Each team will play 2 home and 2 road games against its 7 division rivals. Teams will play 2 home games and 1 road game against 4 conference opponents, and 1 home game and 2 road games against the other 4. So that makes sense. So you get 8 divisions, or you get 4 divisions of 8. You're going to play your 7 division rivals 4 times. So there's 28 games. You're going to play the other 16 teams, or you're going to play the other 8 teams 3 times each. So there's 24 games. So that's 52. And then you're going to play home and home against the 16 teams in the other conference. You're going to play the other 16 teams in the Eastern Conference, or in the other conference, twice. So that is a sensible way to do that. That is a way to get a balanced schedule. So I do understand that. All-Star game is in UBS Arena this year on Long Island. 3 outdoor games. Winnipeg hosting Montreal in Winnipeg. Utah against Colorado at the University of Utah's football stadium. And then Dallas Stars against Vegas Golden Knights at AT&T Stadium in Arlington. You get games in Finland. So, lots of interesting stuff there. I haven't thought a ton about hockey. Obviously, I'd like to see the Islanders do well as they sort of continue their rebuild. Dana said, I'd rather the World Series game start at 5 p.m. Eastern time, just saying. So I get it's a delicate balancing act. And I don't think they'll ever go back to weekday World Series games, like weekday afternoon World Series games. And certainly the fact that the fact that baseball games are quicker now helps, because like a lot of my life, I remember, playoff games between the Yankees and Red Sox that started at 8:30 at night and then took 4.5 hours. And it was 1:00 in the morning when they ended, and it is kind of fun when you have, it's like being a Yankees fan. It was very rare, and then not at all, that the Yankees would play weekday afternoon games in the playoffs. That would almost never happen because they were the Yankees and they were primetime. The only ones I can remember, even, a lot of them were in the 2003 season. And the reason for that was the Cubs were in the playoffs for the first time in forever. And the Red Sox, but particularly the Cubs. So like, I remember the first round of the 2003 playoffs, it was the Yankees and the Twins. And there was a couple of games that were on at like 1:00 in the afternoon then. because everybody kind of knew, okay, the Yankees are going to beat the Twins, but we have the Cubs, we have the Red Sox. They're a little bit better of a story at the moment. And then even in the ALCS, there was 1 or 2 games that the Yankees played at like 4 o'clock because the Cubs were going to play at night. But in general, the Yankees play at night. So I don't have to, but it is kind of cool those first couple of days. And who knows what they're doing with the schedule these days. But like, I always did like back in the, the divisional playoff era when there was just the 4 teams, when they would start and you have for like 2 or 3 days in a row, you'd have, I guess not even 2 or 3 days in a row, but like 2 or 3 days in the first round. You'd have games at like 1, 4, and 7. And that was kind of neat because it was like afternoon weekday baseball is a common thing during the season. But when suddenly it's an important game, like not even the Yankees, but just anybody kind of like looking in on TV and seeing like it's a stadium filled with people on a Wednesday afternoon or a Tuesday afternoon at 1 o'clock. And it's like intense because it's a playoff game and it's a playoff game in a short series and a best of 5 game. And it would always be kind of cool because it was like, not again, teams have weekday afternoon games all the time now, but it's a different thing than when it's like an important game. My brother said Yankees would always get 1 p.m. game. Okay, that's fair, but other teams would get day games much more often in the playoffs. So when it comes to the World Series, I know for years people have talked about having World Series games that having like at least 1 day World Series game. Because you do get day games unless, depending on how the time zones work out. But in general, you get day games up through the AL and NLCS because there's at least a couple of days where they're both on. Because it's not like, in basketball where the Eastern and Western Conference just rotate days. In baseball, it's like if the ALCS starts Monday, the NLCS is going to start Tuesday. So games 2 and 1 are going to be at the same time. And then games 4 and 3 and 5 and 4 and 7 and 6, like you're going to have at least 3 or maybe even 4 games, maybe even 5 and whatever I just did, where they play on the same day. So one of those games is going to be at 4 o'clock Eastern at the latest, usually. They talk about the World Series where they say, and the dates of the World Series are changing all the time now, but like, you're not going to play on a Sunday afternoon because you're not going to go up against the NFL. But what about a Saturday afternoon? What about playing one of the World Series games on a Saturday at 4 o'clock? And, people's immediate reaction is, well, you really want to go up against college football. And I guess the one thing, and this is true for the NFL, but I think at this point, the World Series actually even avoids Sunday. If you consider the NFL plays Thursday, Sunday, Monday, most weeks, I know there's all kinds of craziness. You can't avoid all of them. But you can play, Friday, Saturday, off Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, off Thursday, Friday, Saturday, which is, I think, what they do. So you could theoretically, if you did that, right, Friday, Saturday, off Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, off Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, off Thursday, I don't think they would play game 7 of the World Series on a Saturday afternoon, but you could play game 2 of the World Series on a Saturday afternoon. And Dana said, I remember when I was in junior high, the famous Mets Astros game 6 in 86 NLCS started at like 2 p.m. Yeah. And I mean, I remember Yankees Red Sox games that were in the afternoon, like NLCS, or not the Yankees and the Red Sox in the NLCS would definitely be memorable. Yankees Red Sox ALCS games, I remember a few of them that were in the afternoon. I remember game 6 in 2003. And I remember 03 more vividly, not just because of what happened in 04, but I was still in high school in 03. In 04, I was in college. So and this was before, I didn't even have a cell phone, but nobody had a smartphone. So if the game was on while I was in school or while I was at football practice, not that I would have my smartphone with me at football practice, but you were basically shut out to the world. So, and I remember the one Yankees Twins game that year in the ALDS that was, like my brother said, the 1 o'clock game we didn't have our practice started at 3. I've told this story a bunch before, but our practice started at 3, but between 2 and 3, we were supposed to be in the weight room. And it was getting towards the end of the season anyway. I think there was like 3 weeks left in the season because this would have been like mid to late October at this point. And I just went out to my car and said I couldn't find one of my pads and just sat in my car for 45 minutes pretending to look for one of my pads so I could listen to the Yankee game. And my coach was not fooled at all. But, yeah, you have NLCS and ALCS games during the day and sometimes even during the day, during the week that you have to. The World Series, I personally, as much as I love history and love whatever, I personally in favor of them playing World Series games at 3:00 in the afternoon Eastern time on a Tuesday or Wednesday. I have to admit that I'm not. I like the nostalgia aspect of it, but people can't watch. I know people can watch, at work more than they could 20 or 30, even 10 years ago. You still shut a lot of kids out. Now doing it at 9:00 is just as bad. And then you factor in the West Coast and whatever, but like getting back to what I was saying, you could play a World Series game on a Saturday afternoon. Now I know immediately people are going to say, what about college football? And I don't doubt the popularity of college football. I know college football is huge. There's a lot more overlap in terms of big baseball markets with big NFL markets than there is big college football markets. There just is. College football is dominated by the South, where there's not a ton of MLB teams and also not a ton of it makes more sense. And also college football also plays huge marquee games on Saturday night all the time. So if you're going to play on Saturday, you are just as likely to go up against a huge marquee college game at 8:00 on Saturday night as you are at 4:00. You're almost less likely to go up against a marquee college football game at 4:00 than you are at 8:00. So I do think they should play at least one World Series game on a Saturday afternoon. Again, I get Sunday is tough because the NFL is as popular as college football is. The NFL is the NFL, and doing it at 5:00 on a Thursday or a Wednesday is tempting, but the time on that is probably past, as much as we hate to say it. But I do think they should do a Saturday one. I think it would be neat. Watch they finally agree to do it, and then there's a 3-hour rain delay, and the game starts at 8:30 anyway. But I do think that would be cool. I don't even really remember how we got on this topic, but I do think that would be cool. Because I was talking about the game time starts, and Dana said he wished the World Series game started at those times too. Because I was talking about the NHL, and we led into a thing about World Series start time. So you can tell we are, we're really locked in. So sort of coincidentally at the same time, the baseball schedule came out, and we'll talk about in the last segment. It seems like the Yankees and Pirates are playing a wild game right now. This game is 8-5 in the third inning already. The same day that the NHL schedule came out for 2027 or 26-27, the baseball schedule came out for next year. And, it's a weird exercise because almost to a man, everybody is pretty sure that there's going to be some kind of work stoppage that's going to result in lost games. The ESPN headline is, let me see if I can load it. It's doing that thing where it makes me load the app. But basically the MLB headline is MLB set for earliest opening day in 2027 if there is a season. And they keep making the opening days earlier and earlier, which I'm all for building more off days into the season, but March 27th is a tough time to be playing baseball in half the country, or March 24th, like this one is. Traditional opening day takes place on Thursday, March 25th. There's a game Wednesday, March 24th. Final day of the regular season, Sunday, September 26th, blah, 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 blah. Red Sox host the Guardians. A's will host back-to-back 3-game series at Las Vegas Ballpark in May and June. So they would be playing a few games in Las Vegas. All-Star game next year is at Wrigley Field, which I didn't realize. Second half of the season, July, blah, 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 blah. So I thought it would be funny if since almost everybody thinks that even in the rosiest scenario, some games get lost at the beginning of the season and they have to redo the schedule anyway. Like, it would have been funny if they just purposely released things to screw around with people. Like, oh, the Reds will play their first 81 games of the season on the road. Or like, the Mets will open the season with 3 games at home, and then they will travel to San Francisco, and then they will go to Miami for 3 games, and then they will go to Los Angeles. Like just make them ping pong across the country, just to have people have a conniption. But, the long and short of it, and, we'll, like I said, after the break, we'll talk about 2026 baseball. But, everybody seems pretty convinced that there is going to be a significant work stoppage in Major League Baseball, a work stoppage that almost certainly will result in lost time. If you'll remember, in 2022, I believe it was the year that the lockout stretched late enough where I think they had to cancel just the first week of games, and what they were able to do was tack 3 of them on at the end of the regular season and fill in the other 3 of them at various points throughout the season. But that was like as late as it could possibly go without them having to overhaul the schedule. So you would imagine that if more than 2 weeks are lost, they would have to start really rejiggering the schedule and give up on 162 game full season. There will probably be plenty of time to talk about that. There's a number of ways to look at that. And my sort of gut reflex is to always be like, the owners are trying to be cheap, and the owners are, want you to think they're losing money when they're not really losing money, and all of that. And I agree with all that. And there are certainly some owners that, ought to be stripped of their teams just for lack of trying to compete and, trying to save money and whatever. And, there are people who will earnestly, and I think do a good job making the argument that putting in a salary cap will not actually do anything for the competitive balance of baseball. Fans just want it because if you're a fan of a small market team, or I shouldn't even say a small market team, but of a team that's non-competitive, you want to believe that will make it more competitive. And even if you're presented with evidence that suggests otherwise, that's still what you want. Even if I were to concede that all the way, and I'm not willing to concede that all the way, but like, I don't know how you can have a system where, and I know people will point and say, look at the teams who've won the World Series the last bunch of years. And, well, I mean, before the Dodgers really, but like, I couldn't imagine being a fan of a team like, Cincinnati or Pittsburgh, and you can be furious with your owners, but also knowing that if a player gets good enough to be like a top of baseball player, I basically have 2 hopes. One is that he's under team control for long enough that they win a World Series before we have to lose him, or that we're able to trade him for enough prospects. Like, it is very hard as a fan, and I sort of did this for years with the Knicks, and it's a totally different conversation, but like, it is very hard as a fan to be excited about a team where your best, like, where the thing that objectively is the best thing for your team year in and year out, I say this with the Giants all the time, is to lose. That's when I talk about like the Giants for, in previous years, but like with one of these teams that I'm thinking of, it's like, if the best thing you can hope for is like maybe whatever happens this year can turn into prospects who 5 years from now can turn this into a contender. It is tough to do that year in and year out to have any level of devotion. And while I think that all of these teams could spend more money than they do, the Pirates and the Reds and Tampa and most teams cannot spend like the Dodgers do. They cannot spend like even the Yankees or the Mets do. The Cubs in certain instances, the Red Sox. They can't do it. And again, it does not automatically translate into championships. I get that, but it helps. It sure as hell helps. And, if you're like, I point to the Royals all the time. The Royals were basically the dream scenario for almost half of Major League Baseball, which is we get this core together. They're good enough to compete for 2 years. And before we have to lose them all, we win a championship. And that happened. They got the one, and then they had to lose all those guys and bottom out again. And most fans would take that. And I agree with that. I would take it as a fan too. But most of those teams don't get that. They might get close. They might not get close, but they don't usually get that championship before they lose the rest of the team. I think it is a tough situation to know that you are in a league with teams you can't compete with. The Yankees, the Dodgers are doing what's right for the Dodgers. And I just always say this about the Yankees. The Yankees have to do what's right for the Yankees. But I also understand the frustration that a lot of fans have about the nature of baseball. Now, do I think a salary cap is going to happen? No. I don't think a salary cap. I think the players union in baseball is too strong that I do not see a salary cap happening. At least not for a very long time. But I do think that the owners are probably going to take a much harder line than they have taken in a very long time. And I would not be surprised if we look at a less than, I guess COVID kind of set the precedent where they'll play as few as 60 games. You could say they wouldn't do that. I would guess they would play as few as 60 games. I think there's a really good chance. I would say there's a better than 2/3 chance that we see a less than 100-game baseball season next year. I'm hesitant to say there's going to be no season just because that's only happened once. And it was hockey. They lost a whole season 20-something years ago. It's such a different scenario. I know baseball lost the playoffs in the World Series, but that was also a strike in August, which was a much different thing than a lockout. I have a hard time seeing there just being no baseball season next year, but I also cannot see this being a situation that resolves itself by February of next year. So that's just kind of my my hypotheticals on it. So let's take a break. We'll come back. I promise we'll get into some actual baseball for a little while, and then we'll take things right till 9:00, and then we will all be out of here, free to fulfill a life, pursue a life of religious freedom. We'll be back in just a few minutes.
You want to know why we created this backpack? Holes. Big black holes.
Back here live on the Split Decision here on YouTube Live on this Monday, July the 20th, 2026. We have just a little bit of time left before we wrap up for the evening. So we'll just keep on. We'll get to some more baseball on the field at the moment. You got some teams on some crazy win streaks as we come out of the All-Star break, and I think the Yankees play game 100 for them tonight. So we'll take a look at where everything stands here in a minute. On the Yankees, I always like to start with the injury front. Obviously, the news on Aaron Judge is not good. Aaron Judge finally got enough time under his belt to be re-imaged, and no real progress. He is still not ready to resume baseball activities. They transferred him to the 60-day DL, which I think people did read a little too much into, because I guess there was a guy in the minors who, if they didn't add to the 40-man basically by that day, was going to be able to have an option to become a free agent. Meanwhile, Judge can easily be put on the 60-day DL because he's going to be out more than 60 days. He's close to 60 days already. It's retroactive from when he went on the DL in the first place. So that part, doesn't really mean anything to me, but he, I mean, Labor Day's got to be the best case scenario for him at this point. No timetable to resume baseball. Not ready to resume baseball activity. Let's say that's 10 days from now. And it does not sound like it's going to be I think you got to act under the assumption that Judge, if you told me right now they'll have Judge back for their first postseason game if they get there, I'd probably sign up for that versus letting it play out. But this seems like it's going to be an injury that lingers for quite a long time. That not even lingers, that keeps him out for most of the rest of the regular season, if not all of it. Giancarlo Stanton, no timetable to start a minor league rehab assignment. Brian Hoke of MLB.com reports. As I've gone back and forth on this before, and I'm becoming more and more convinced of it each day, Aaron Judge should be a full-time DH. I had been saying, as early as 2028, and let's for the moment pretend there's a season next year. I think as early as next year. And I think you just figure out Stanton. If he sits on the bench, if you bring him into pinch hit, I know it's not a good use of a roster spot, but you can't have Aaron Judge keep getting hurt playing the field. If you want to put Giancarlo Stanton in left field in the first few innings of the game until he gets 3 at-bats and then take him out for defense, I know you don't have big rosters, but I am not willing to keep getting Aaron Judge hurt in the field. And, when he gets hurt in the field, he misses months and months at a time. So I don't know. The reason for not doing that is, well, what are you going to do with Stanton then? And Stanton is always hurt anyway, so I don't really want to hear it. Otherwise, Rodon, still, a ways away. Fried seems to be progressing towards getting back to being healthy. I believe he started making rehab starts. The Yankees, finally played some good baseball going into the All-Star break, but most of that was attributable to playing a poor Washington Nationals team. And they also had, I guess the Nationals aren't poor, but the Yankees had a, they finished the first half of the season on a 4-game win streak. They avoided getting swept by Tampa Bay. And then they won 3 games in a row in Washington, the 10th, 11th, and 12th of July last weekend, 5-3, 4-2, 5-3. Lots of late comebacks in those games to win. Went to the All-Star break, came back, and had a rough one with the Dodgers because they just didn't score. On Friday they lost 2-1 in a game they were up 1-0 until the 7th inning. And then Muncy hit a 2-run home run and the Dodgers won. You're not going to probably beat the Dodgers with 1 run on 6 hits. If you hold the Dodgers to, yeah, that's what I said. The Nationals are better than I thought they were. And we'll look at the standings here in a minute, but their bullpen certainly didn't cover themselves in glory in the Yankee series, but no, they're not a bad team. They're not a terrible team by any stretch. Then the Yankees, they got rained out on Saturday. So they played a doubleheader yesterday. And despite it being as close as 3-1 in the 8th inning, They end up losing 8-2 as the Yankees bullpen after, Schlittler wasn't great, 4 1/3, 6 hits, 3 runs, but then the bullpen, particularly Jake Bird, a third of an inning, 4 hits, 5 runs, 2 walks. Just a brutal piece of pitching there as they lose that game. And then they did salvage one last night, and as it looked like they were going to blow it, they were up. I think they were up 1-0, and then the Dodgers tied it in the 8th, 1-1. The Yankees also in the 7th inning had the bases loaded, nobody out, and I think 3 straight guys struck out. They did not score a run. Let's pull that up actually, because I was watching most of this game last night. Yeah, and where was it? Was it the 8th? What inning was this that this happened? Bottom 6. Okay, it was the bottom of the 5th. They had the base loaded, nobody out, and then Dominguez struck out looking, Chisholm fouled out to third, and Volpe struck out swinging. But then in the bottom of the 8th, after it had been 1-1, they did get a home run from Jazz Chisholm. They then did get, a few more base runners, but it was only 2-1. Things started to get a little bit interesting. They walked Freddie Freeman to lead off, and then Bednar was able to strike out Mookie Betts, get a fielder's choice, and then get the pop out to avoid the sweep for the Yankees. So the Yankees 55-44. They begin, as we said tonight, a 3-game stretch with the better than you would assume Pirates at home. The Yankees are now in a stretch where they're going to play all teams that have a winning record for quite a while. They're at Philadelphia this coming weekend. Then they go to the surprising White Sox. Then they stay in Chicago to play the Cubs, so a long road trip. Then they come home for St. Louis, Atlanta, Seattle, and then they start a stretch against like Baltimore and Tampa. So quite a while against teams that are at least somewhat in the playoff picture. The big story in the American League, especially in the American League East, and I'll admit I did not realize this until about 3 days ago. So Tampa Bay has come back to the pack a little bit. They've lost 5 in a row. Yankees are actually now only a game and a half behind Tampa Bay. Tampa Bay's 56-42. Yankees 55-44. After they split 4 games with Tampa Bay right before the Washington series and the All-Star break. But the big story in the American League East right now, all of baseball really, the Red Sox have won 13 games in a row. They are now 50-48. They've pulled themselves back over 500. They are only 4 games behind the Yankees for second. They are only 6 games out of first place. Also, right below them is the Orioles, who've won 7 in a row. They are only 2 games under 500. Now, not nearly the streak that Boston is on, but those 2 teams also play each other. I don't know if that series does start today. It's 4-4 in the 6th inning. So somebody's streak is going to end tonight. Certainly, again, the Red Sox has been longer and has moved them up further in the standings. But Baltimore, if you're near 500 in the American League, you're in contention, as we'll see in the wild card picture. And then Toronto still 7 games back. But if they have a streak like either one of these teams, they can find themselves back in the hunt. American League Central, you got the White Sox 52-46 with a 1-game lead over Cleveland. Minnesota still kind of sniffing around, 2 games under 500. And then Detroit and Kansas City, a good piece back. Kansas City, a very good piece back. And then in the AL West, you got Texas. Again, a whole lot of mediocrity. Texas 50-49, Seattle 50-50, Houston only 4 games out of first place at 47-54, and then the Athletics and the A's a ways back. In the wild card picture right now, your wild cards would be the Yankees, Cleveland, and Boston. So all right there. Boston has played themselves into postseason positioning. You'd have Seattle, Baltimore, and Minnesota all just 2 games back. So if you go from the Yankees are a decent amount ahead. Cleveland, Boston, Seattle, Baltimore, and Minnesota are all within 3 games of each other in the loss column for those last 2 wild card spots. So incredibly tight there. And then even teams like Houston, Toronto, Detroit, not really out of it yet. In the NL, you got Atlanta with just a 3-game lead over Philadelphia. Philadelphia has obviously been coming on strong for the last couple of months, but Atlanta built up such a cushion early that even as they've struggled, they're still with a 3-game lead. Miami, still 4 games over 500, still very much in the picture. And Washington, an even 50-50 after 100 games, which, again, I think surprises a lot of people. And then way off in the distance, 42-58 is the New York Metropolitans. In the Central, Milwaukee with a 6-game lead over the Cubs. Milwaukee 62-37, which is good for the second best record in baseball, I believe, and not far off from the best record in baseball. The Dodgers have struggled a little going into the All-Star break. Cubs 56-43, St. Louis 51-47, Pittsburgh 52-48. So how about Pittsburgh being 4 games over 500, 100 games into the season? And then out west, the Dodgers with a huge lead, 63-37. Arizona, surprising 51-48, and then the Padres just a game under Giants and Colorado way back. In the NL wild card right now, you would have Cubs and Phillies, and then you have St. Louis, Miami, Pittsburgh, all basically tied. St. Louis is 51-47, Miami 52-48, Pittsburgh 52-48. So just fractions of percentage points there. And then Arizona, a half game back, they have 48 losses. And then Washington and San Diego, 2 and 2.5 games back, respectively. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 teams within 2 games of that last wild card spot, or in a wild card spot. The only teams that are more out of it more than that out of it is Cincinnati, who's 8 games under, San Francisco 15 under, the Mets 16 under, and Colorado 21 under. So, we're not quite to the dog days yet, but we will be in the dog days very, very, very soon here in the Major League Baseball season. And a couple of more weeks till the trade deadline. I think it's like August 2nd or August 3rd this year, because usually it's over the week, or usually it's July 31st, but if that falls on a weekend, they delay it usually till like Monday or Tuesday the next week. I think it's technically the commissioner's discretion. So my father sent me a text that my nephew Thomas heard us talking. He heard me talking to him tonight, and he was listening intently, and then he liked listening to his dad call in. So I'm happy we could be of service to Thomas, my nephew. And once I realized that he listens on occasion, I realized I have to an extent, especially at the beginning of the show, watch my language a little bit. So I've tried my best to do that since I found out Thomas occasionally listens. Thomas likes to, whenever I start doing the podcast with my brother and we connect on Zoom, a lot of times lately, Thomas is waiting with the headphones on to say hello to me. So I appreciate that as well. So, we're getting there with baseball, a couple of weeks till the trade deadline. For the Yankees, it's a weird situation, because certainly you look at where they are and it's like, they could theoretically be the number 1 seed in the American League East. In the American League, it doesn't take much imagination to see them being the number 1 seed in the American League. It's also hard to see them being any kind of a serious playoff team without Aaron Judge back and producing at a reasonably high level. Now, if Cole pitches like Garrett Cole can or has in the past, Schlittler pitches well, if they get Max Fried back and he continues to pitch at a high level, that could possibly offset a little of that. But, the long and short of it is still a long ways to go. I know people are expecting the Yankees to make a move or two here in the next few weeks. I personally have a hard time seeing that happen, because it never happens. I would kind of imagine we'll get a new batch of relievers to get furious with, who can forget a couple of years ago with Mark Leiter Jr. That's the extent of what my brother said. He better be in bed now. I think he is. I think my father was just saying he enjoyed listening earlier. He said, heard you talking to him tonight, which was at 7:00. He was listening intently. Then he liked listening to his dad call in. That was all much earlier. So I would assume Thomas is in bed by now. But I guess with that, we'll wrap things up. It was good to be back. Again, these shows this time of year, we kind of like to meander a little bit, but I also think that's part of the fun. I guess I'd be remiss if I mentioned it. I went to a Myrtle Beach Pelicans game while I was at I was down in Myrtle Beach. I went to a Myrtle Beach Pelicans game. They were playing the Fredericksburg Nationals. We were around a bunch of diehard Fredericksburg Nationals fans, which was kind of unique. But they are the Myrtle Beach Pelicans are the single A regular affiliate for the Chicago Cubs, and sort of bizarre on top of that, I think it was the Cubs team, not the Nationals. The Nationals team has Juan Soto's brother, so a lot of people, kids and stuff, were getting autographs from him. But for the Fred Nats, yes, that's what they were calling them. So we were around a bunch of those. So it was a crazy game because the Fredericksburg was up 8-0 going into the 9th inning, and the Pelicans brought the tying run to the plate. It was 8-6, and there was a man on base. So, like, if that guy had hit a home run, it would have been a tie game, and then he, like, flew out to left field. So Fredericksburg did win. But that was cool. I think it was on the Myrtle Beach team. There was a guy from Rhinebeck, New York, which was crazy. Like, couple of towns north of Poughkeepsie. It's just funny that I was, like, not exactly a baseball hotbed, and then I was in Myrtle Beach and saw a guy from basically my hometown, or my home county, I guess, at least. So that was neat. But they were only home the Saturday and Sunday we got there, and Saturday we got in late in the day. So if we were going to go, it was going to be Sunday, and somehow we got through the weather that they were calling for being terrible with only minor showers. So I was glad we got to do that. And in addition to the Myrtle Beach Pelicans, we actually saw actual pelicans at Myrtle Beach. And I don't think I'd ever seen pelicans before, and that was neat. So with that, we will wrap things up.
I'm Chef Antonio from Wonder. And
this commercial to play. I also managed to play 11 games of a Tecmo Super Bowl season on vacation with the Atlanta Falcons, who are the closest team to Myrtle Beach that are in the game because the Panthers did not exist at the time. So I'm 11-0 with the Falcons in Tecmo, beating the 49ers twice, and hopefully about winning the division. We'll finish that up sometime this week, and I will keep everybody abreast. So with that, we will say goodnight. Thank you to everybody for listening. All various generations of Newmans for listening. Thanks to Dana for being back. We missed Dana the last few weeks that we were on, so we'll be on again next week, and sporadically for a couple of weeks after that, we'll keep everybody updated. Back into the grind when we get to about the last week in August, then we start turning the page until football season. So take care, everybody. Stay safe. Have a good week, and we will see you 1 week from tonight, Monday, July the 27th, 7 p.m. YouTube Live. Bye now.